Water, earth, fire, air. Long ago, I didn't know anything about The Last Airbender. Then, everything changed when my best friend said, let's do a podcast. We could call it Avatar State Radio. 6,953 days had passed before I discovered Avatar, not the Blue Cats, but a 19-year-old cartoon. Like Aang, I have a lot to learn, but I believe I'll love Avatar The Last Airbender. Welcome to this week's edition of Avatar State Radio, the only podcast that rehashes Avatar The Last Airbender with a fresh voice who's never seen it, and that's me, Kev.
And a not fresh voice. Am I rotten in this case?
No,
Mike.
I guess it would be not rotten. Though that is the opposite of fresh.
Am I overripe? Is that what it is? I'm overripe. We'll go with
yes.
that.
Yes, there you go. As I went through that intro, I was like, I literally saw another podcast that's doing what we're doing, except everyone has watched it. I think we are the only one where I'm the fresh face, and then we have the experienced person. Anyway, Avatar State Radio, talking about episode 4, The Warriors of Kyoshi.
Kyoshi? I think it's Kyoshi.
Oh, it might be Kyoshi. Yes, it is Kyoshi.
It's not
a
like
silent
an
K.
off-brand Mario dinosaur.
But it was, so I gotta say, and I know we're kind of just jumping right into it this week, but I'm trying to make this a tight podcast. We're trying to get better at this. And my first note is fucking Sokka. because he's a sexist jerk again.
Right.
Which, it turned him off for me in this episode slightly, only because, I thought maybe we'd move past that. It definitely wasn't like as irritating as it was in the first episode. And maybe that's because like I've grown to like appreciate him over the course of a couple episodes now.
Well, I mean, the other thing too is he definitely grew within this episode. So you got to see him start off as we got beat by a bunch of girls to like, yeah, you're girls, but you're also warriors. Like one doesn't diminish the other. Right.
Yeah. I mean, the what we saw in the first 3 episodes kind of repeated itself all within this episode with Sokka's story here. And I do have like another note I have with him is like, he's a humbled person at some point when he goes to intrude on the quote unquote dance lessons or whatever right. he said they were doing. And then obviously there's some growth there when he shows back up to like ask to be trained, because I think, that's a real humbling moment for him to go and ask for that, because I think he realizes that like maybe he is not that well trained to be a warrior.
Right. But at the same time, he does turn around and kind of take Suki off guard, because he in the middle of their training, he ends up knocking her on her butt and she's like, what the heck just happened? So, I mean, I feel like the lump of clay that Sokka has the potential to be molded into something really good by what we see in the first couple of episodes. The episode where he's fighting with Zuko, like you very much feel that he's rough around the edges. But he, like, even with the little bit of training that he has, he's the one that kind of goes up head to head against Zuko the most in this sequence.
Yes.
He lasts a little bit longer than the Kyoshi warriors, but then again, Zuko has, a big ego too, and I'm sure he was caught completely off guard when that one Kyoshi warrior knocked him off his saddle.
Yeah. I mean, that was, something that I noticed as well, is like Zuko had that very similar Sokka moment where it was like, oh, you're just a bunch of girls, which is it's kind of a shame that that's how this show is kind of presenting the all male character. Well, not all male characters, but like the 2 of the major male characters thus far, is that like, oh, we just assume girls aren't warriors, when, it's beyond what we've seen in the show and beyond, Katara and these warriors here. Like, we know that there have been avatars in the past that are females, so obviously great warriors.
Right.
So it's a weird, like, it's a weird, I don't even want to call it a balance. It's just a weird kind of like back and forth they're playing with that kind of trope.
Yeah.
That honestly, like, I don't know, obviously, the live action series is newer and would be potentially commenting on this, but I feel like in today's world that you probably wouldn't see that as much,
Right.
which I think is for the better. Like, I honestly do. Like it doesn't. I don't think Sokka being sexist in like the very first episode and the very beginning of this episode, I don't think taking that away affects how his character could be portrayed as kind of a jerk or kind of like kind of have a big a chip on his shoulder, an ego. I think the character stays the same if you remove like the fact that he's kind of sexist sometimes.
Well, you'd be interested to see what happens when some of the other material tries to rehash this stuff. So,
I will be. I will be, and I could foresee that, like the M. Night Shyamalan movie. I could foresee that rehashing it for sure, just because again, that's, I think, if I remember correctly, that was like 2010, if off the top of my head. So like that doesn't seem like it's as far removed from like the time where we just kind of had that. I don't even want to call it humor, just that kind of trope in properties.
what you know what it is for me? I think certainly in the world that we live in, we're a lot more susceptible to the idea that everybody is equal in the way that they can present themselves. But same as with other things that are kind of built to feel like period pieces, the universe that they're in, I don't think that it takes away from it to lean into things that we now consider to be wrong.
That's
So
true.
like
That's true.
we kind of look at this show in the lens of, hey, it's happening now because we're in now, but it is very much like a late feudal era Asia, or
Right.
pan Asia kind of feeling, where I'm sure, and honestly, there's a lot of that still going on in those parts of the world today. So
Right. That is very true. I didn't really think of the fact that it is kind of a period piece. It's hard to when you have a show with like flying bison and magic powers or bending powers, whatever you want to call it. It's sometimes you forget that.
right,
So, and I don't think I don't discredit the show for doing it. It's interesting that it seems to be in 4 episodes, not a central theme, but it's a theme. It's a theme
will
of
it
the show.
happen again? Who knows?
Who knows? The other, I think, major thing we see that I have noted here is like the Aang Katara back and forth in relationship here, where like he is seeking her attention, and she's kind of, I don't know if like she's in the beginning, I don't know if she's purposely like ignoring him when she's like sewing the pants. But it feels like at some point she's like kind of purposely ignoring him, but then she's also feeling some jealousy to the
Right.
fact that like he's getting his attention elsewhere.
Yeah.
And it's really hard to nail down that relationship. Like, I know, like, obviously Katara and Sokka are brother and sister, so that's an easy one. It almost feels like Sokka's kind of like a big brother to Aang as well.
Mm-hmm.
But it's really hard to nail down what the relationship between Katara and Aang is. And I know it's weird to talk about it because they're 14 and 12 years old or whatever they are. But I don't know if like Aang is trying to get her attention out of like a crush type feeling, or is it like, oh, that's my big sister and I want her to pay attention to me?
Well, I don't know, man. She was the first girl he saw in 100 years. So you kind of mentioned it last week, and it was kind of an interesting take on it. In a lot of ways, Katara feels kind of like the den mother of the group.
Yes.
Like she's sewing Sokka's pants. She's being very respectful of Aang's feelings and things like that. But maybe that is kind of like a turning point in this episode, because whether it's romantic jealousy or some other kind of jealousy, she does seem to be like, hey, like, you're spending a lot of time with these other people who are not us.
Right.
And a lot of it could also be, I'm trying to move forward with our quest. Like, at the end of the day, I know you're 12, but we have a huge mission to undertake, and we can't do it if you're hanging out here, you know, throwing up, you know, your muscles.
Marbles.
And
and I do think that there is like her being concerned with him being the avatar getting to his head, which because this is the first time he's kind of like embracing the role of avatar. Uh and I think that's like a right concern to have, is that, you know, when you go from we don't really know what much about Aang's past, you know, before he was frozen, other than the one flashback or maybe the two flashbacks we've had. But you know, he's kind of going from, I don't know, maybe dorky or not necessarily nerdy, but just like a little kid, to being like, oh my, like I have one of my notes is Aang is the Beatles of the Atla world.
very much, that's a good point.
And to go from 0 to 60 essentially can easily go to someone's head, and especially someone that's young. So I think her concerns were valid there. I don't think that necessarily came from a place of jealousy. I think that came from a place of caring. But it is obvious that because he is getting that attention elsewhere, that she is jealous of that. And it was just an interesting part of their, you know, relationship, and seeing, you know, that little adversary that they kind of had in this episode with one another, and obviously it's resolved by the end of it, and whatnot. But that felt like those 2 points, Katara and Aang, and then Sokka, they were like 2 of the like B stories almost.
Right.
What was interesting with Zuko, which I don't actually have any official notes on here, other than I guess is the closest thing to it, is that war is coming to Kyoshi, which is, you know, we learned in the very beginning of that sequence where you know, Team Aang gets captured, that they've stayed out of the war thus far for seemingly the 100 years, which is an interesting thing to see, that a war that's been going on this long, that's being led and arguably won by the Fire Nation, who is I would imagine trying to take over the world, is their end game here. Somehow this village or island or whatever has stayed out of it. Like they've just kind of.
Well, I mean, so, you know, it might be because there's no tactical advantage to taking over Kyoshi Island. There's no benders that we've seen. You know, we do know that it's got warriors who are, you know, proving in the Avatar world that you don't necessarily need to be a bender to be, you know, a competent warrior. But there's no benders, and the Fire Nation thinks that they're the ones to look out for. Because it's a small island, probably not a lot of decent resources to pillage and plunder. And for the most part, it seems like they're the ones kind of staying back as well. So if they're not going to be a thorn in my side, why am I going to be a thorn in theirs?
Right. And I wonder if we, you know, see these warriors again in the future, because now clearly they have skin in the game, right? Like they obviously respect the Avatar because the island is named after an Avatar. There's a statue of that Avatar that's there. And again, I wonder if Aang, who like knew that Kyoshi was a Avatar, is that from just like what he learned pre being frozen, or is that just like as he, you know, when he was in that sanctuary or at the air temple, like did he suddenly get all the knowledge of his past lives? But yeah, I mean, this island clearly respects the Avatar, and I'm curious to see if they come back to now fight against the Fire Nation, especially if like Aang and Team Aang there, if they're ever in need of help.
Right. Well, we've definitely seen the idea that he's going to have to travel the world in order to, you know, learn various things from various people. But even as the Avatar, with all the power that we've seen, does he have the strength to do it on his own, or is, to your point, like, these people, are they able to kind of step up and join in and help when he needs it? And to your point about him kind of knowing about Avatar Kyoshi, we had seen in the previous episode that just walking up to Roku, he knew who Roku was in statue form.
Right. Right.
But there's also a good chance that, to some extent, like you had mentioned earlier, the Avatar is kind of like the Beatles in this. They're the BTS of this world right now.
Right. I guess the BTS is the 2020s version of the Beatles. I pulled out I was going to say 30-year reference, but oh my God, it's like a 60-year reference.
Right. There's a good chance that a lot of the people growing up learn a lot more about the avatars. Like we know about like various presidents and stuff like that. There's a good chance that they know about, a decent amount of the avatars. And I would assume that some of the more recent avatars are the ones that a lot about. So, we obviously saw the whole circle of avatars in the sanctuary last week, but a good chance that the kind of going forward, we're going to continue meeting avatars.
Right.
Whether that's in kind of statue form or in a shrine or temple or something like that, like we saw in Kyoshi. So I definitely think that that kind of will play into the sense of identity that Aang will have.
Yeah. And I think, you mentioned something about, will Aang be able to do it on his own as an avatar, or will he need help? I think like something that's great that we saw here is that he did learn a valuable lesson in this episode, in that like right now he can't afford to stay in one place too long.
Right, because Zuko shows up out of nowhere every time.
Right, like staying here, news traveled fast, and there wasn't even like he didn't avatar state in this episode, so there was no real like visual indication that like, oh, we could kind of figure out where he's at. Literally, news. I mean, I don't know how news spread that fast. Either they must have been there for a very long time, because seemingly there is, if this is like a futile timeline here, feudal era, then there's no like mass communication that you can do instantaneously, right? Like it's got to be word of mouth from person to person, boat to boat. Maybe I guess there's like some sort of pigeon carrier service or something like that, but so they had to be on this island for quite a while, which is weird to think about, because we really only got like less than maybe like a 15 to 20 minute glimpse of their time on this island.
So I will mention we reached one of our first meme moments in the show too, where again we were talking about Aang and his popularity and everything. He ended up having like most of the young girls in the tribe going nuts over him, but we also saw the guy who was so excited that he started foaming at the mouth.
Oh God, yeah, that's actually I have my note for that is haha, everyone cheering and passing out.
I love the foaming at the mouth guy, and I think that like that was probably like the first meme worthy moment of the show
for sure. Like there's nothing I can't remember. I know what happened in the previous episodes, but there's not any one moment that, other than maybe like the Avatar state moments, or the moment last week where he sees his mentor, his skeletal remains. Like that's a powerful image that I'll remember, but like nothing like this. Like this is definitely the first memeable moment.
Right.
And hilarious. I laughed out loud for real.
One of the other things too, I feel like we've definitely seen it in a couple of the previous episodes where like the faces are really funny, but the face when Aang is like running from the Unagi on the ocean and his face is contorted so wildly, like they don't shy away from being like completely nuts about like the way that they make him look, or Sokka or Katara or anything like that. Like they lean into it. Like I can't imagine, it is Western animation, it does kind of give reference to anime. Like we definitely have noted like the kind of culture overlap that we see in the two different styles of animation. But like, can you imagine The Simpsons doing something like that where it's like Bart's face completely contorts other than like when he's making faces on purpose and it going as wild as it goes here?
Yeah, I mean that does feel like a very anime thing, but it's fun. It really does make it a fun thing, to watch. And I'm sure for like kids, it's also just super fun to see goofy faces all the time.
Right.
I do love the unagi in the episode.
I was wondering if as soon as you heard that you would go to Friends.
As soon as they name dropped it, my big note is unagi exclamation point exclamation point exclamation point. And that was a cool little sequence, like seeing that the like a water dragon, it seems to be, or a water serpent at the very least, and like seeing how while Aang is like not able to really surf it and does get injured doing, or escaping it when it does come that second time around, that he does kind of, I don't want to say master it, but like he is able to use his air bending and mount the unagi to help save the village and put all the fire out.
Right.
It's like one act of kindness before they flee, so that the Fire Nation doesn't, tear this village down.
Right. Now, one thing that I have noticed is this is the first episode, I believe, where we do not see him go all glowy eyed.
Yeah, it is. It's the first episode so far, except for maybe the intro, obviously, but like the actual episode proper, yeah, he doesn't go glowy eye. He doesn't get Avatar state. We only see him bend air. I thought, speaking of bending, I think one of the coolest moments is when, right after he's escaping that unagi that second time, and I guess he had drowned almost, and Katara like water bends the water out of his lungs. I thought that was a really cool little sequence.
Yep, she does that, and then one of the other cool, like she definitely is like more low key these first couple of episodes, but she is kind of starting to do some interesting things, because when she's trying to like get him out of the water and the unagi's about to attack, she does that cool like blast where she sends them both flying backwards as well, out of the reach of the sea serpent or whatever.
Yeah. This episode, I will say that out of the episodes so far, this was probably like one of the lower key ones. That I don't want to say felt like a filler episode, but it was definitely, out of the 4 we've watched thus far, this is a little bit more filler. But I do appreciate the like the new people we saw. It's obviously a lot of character growth for I think all our characters, really, because they all had some sort of like conflict either within themselves or with another person. So I think it was like, overall a great episode, but excuse me, it was I think definitely like a lower key episode, which is fine. Sometimes that's like what you need,
right?
Because it gave us all these great character developments that I'm hopeful to see Sokka, maybe this be a huge learning point for him, and maybe see a little less of the sexism from him, and realize that like, oh, I met these badass women warriors, and I should be a little bit more respectful to the opposite sex.
Right. Everybody has their own journey, and stereotypes of any form really kind of diminish the value that somebody might have, and it could end up really throwing you for a loop too, because you wouldn't give someone the right level of respect that they're deserving of.
Right.
So one of the other things too, before we move into trivia, is I think, unless I'm mistaken again, I think this was the first episode where we actually saw people from the Earth Kingdom.
Oh, did we?
Yeah, because Kyoshi is an Earth avatar, so you would assume that the people of Kyoshi Island are people from the Earth.
Okay.
The Earth Kingdom. Now they might not be part of like the big capital city or anything like that, but we will see like smaller tribes here and there as we go, and I think that they are while they're not benders, they are of the earth element, so to speak.
So they are similar to like Katara and Sokka's little village, where they are part of the that the water tribes, but not actually part of the big city.
Right.
Gotcha. Okay.
That's the way that I interpret it, based on the attire, because we've seen a lot of the greenery and everything that they had. We
Yeah.
also saw like the elder was wearing blue, and I've keyed into like a lot of that a little bit more recently. So maybe they're on like kind of the cusp of like a blending of sorts, where
Right.
the Kyoshi warriors obviously represent the Earth avatar, but maybe because of the placement that they are in the world, maybe there is kind of like a little bit of an overlap.
Yeah, I honestly kind of thought that they were like, maybe we were seeing that while there's these four major communities and kingdoms, that maybe that there's like not universal ones, but like independent ones that are just they don't really quote unquote identify as anything. I thought that's what this was, but that makes a lot of sense, because you're right, because the greenery there, obviously there was a little bit of brown, earth tones, a lot of earth tones in their uniform, so that makes a whole lot of sense. But it's very curious that they're like, if they are Earth Kingdom, which I think we can say here that it's pretty definitive that they are, like that they aren't like willing to defend the world from Hitler, essentially, like at the end of the day.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and you got to figure, like in World War II, we did have our Switzerlands,
That's
and
true.
everything like
That's
that.
true. Hey, you
Hey,
know what? You're right.
we're gonna let everybody else duke it out and hope that at the end of it we come through, bright and shining. And I mean, realistically, like we're watching some of that unfold right now too.
That's
So it is
true. That's true. That's true.
it is a little bit like, hey, we're gonna do what we can, but we're going to try and make sure that we protect our own and our legacy and our culture and our history as well, because at the end of the day, it seems like a lot of what value they place on their island is on their previous avatar.
Yes, and it because never once are they talking about the Earth Kingdom or anything. I mean, the only time we kind of get into that world is when they know Aang is the Avatar, and
Right.
that's when, like, that's kind of when you see this nation, like, oh, okay, like we respect the Avatar because like we're named after one, and B, like, there's hope. I think that's the biggest thing is Aang right now. Whenever he runs into these, and I guess these are really the first outside people we've seen since episode 1, and I say outside to Aang, where the Water Tribe and Gran, like, all of a sudden there's hope with the Water Tribe there.
Right.
So it's very similar feeling here. Is like they felt like at least like the elder leader or whoever was had a little bit of hope and joy of seeing and the Avatar back.
Right. Yep. Agreed. Do you have any other notes before we hit? I only have one bit of trivia, so it'll be a quick one.
All
And
right,
it's kind of
let's hit that trivia then.
so I'm wrapping up a lot of the trivia pieces into one kind of central hub here, and that is that while we've seen a lot of the other cultures represented on screen with kind of the Fire Nation or the Fire Nation being kind of Chinese themed, and the Waterbenders being kind of Inuit and Eskimo and things like that. And we've seen that the air nomads kind of have like that Tibetan kind of feel to them.
Yeah.
At least this section of the Kyoshi Island and everything feels very Japanese.
Yes. Yes.
So they've got words that they've used that are Japanese, because unagi is Japanese for eel. The food that everybody's eating when they're being treated to such hospitality in Kyoshi Village, they are it's very Japanese themed. The metal fans that the Kyoshi warriors use
Yeah.
they're based on the Tessen, which is a metal Japanese war fan, and just everything like that. We've got katanas, we've got
Even the face paint.
Right, the kabuki kind of seeming face paint, and I think the symbolism as well. The Japanese symbol on their gold feature of the sleeves is it actually says Kyo, meaning capital.
Oh, nice.
So
Yeah, no, and I will be. I'm intrigued to see what happens if, assuming we meet other people from, like, when I mean, we're eventually going to see the North Pole water tribes, so I'll be
Right.
interested to see if there's a cultural difference there, because while they're, obviously water folk, um
Water folk.
yeah, that's the wrong terminology 100%, but you know what I mean. They
You
have,
don't know. In Avatar, that might be accurate.
yeah, it could be,
It's a
they like
long
water.
lost vernacular.
They really like water. That's all I know. But I'll be curious because, like, obviously, America is a great example of, like, oh yeah, we are Americans, but like culture in Pennsylvania is very different than it is, like, even as close as, like, Virginia and West Virginia.
Right.
So I'll be curious to see if there is, like, just a universal feel to, like, okay, the water tribe feels like this, the earth kingdom all feels like this, or if there's, like, differences here and there. It
Right.
might not even come up because it's a kid's show. So
Well, yeah, I mean, like you said, there's certain tropes and stereotypes and everything that we've been seeing, and we see them squashed. So it could go in either direction, really.
yeah. But yeah, overall, like I said, very happy with this episode. Low key, but I that's not a bad thing. It was nice to see, like, I mean, it does feel like every episode Aang gets hurt and
Right.
passes
Right.
out. But this one
you
didn't
gotta
lead
figure, like,
to.
how often does Trey get knocked around? I mean, he kind of strikes me as someone who might play it a little bit safe because he's got like the migraines and stuff like that.
Right.
But like growing up, you and I, we were idiots all the time, well into our 20s.
Yeah.
So like,
Well into my 30s.
you if you're Aang and you have this insane ability to do things that nobody else can, number one, your ego is going to be way up there and you're going to say, I can do anything and get away with anything. And I would imagine, because you're 12, your bones are still made of rubber mostly.
Right.
So you bounce right back from that kind of thing. Now, if I sleep the wrong way, I'm out of commission for 3 days.
That's a very interesting point you made about Aang. I didn't really attribute him having an ego until this episode, and that's very, very specifically because of the attention he was getting. But there is a degree of ego that he's been displaying because he is very confident. Maybe ego is the wrong word. He's very confident in his abilities as an airbender.
Right.
And I think rightfully so. I mean, he's clearly held his own.
Right.
And when except for this episode, when he can't, it's kind of when the adrenaline kicks in, or the emotional response kicks in that we've talked about, and the avatar state gets loose. And in this episode where he doesn't let the avatar state loose is when they retreat, which is a weird, like, it feels like, ooh, that sucks that they retreated, but I mean, it was absolutely the right decision. Like, everyone, even the people of the island who were getting attacked, were like okay with him fleeing because they knew he was doing it so that the Fire Nation would chase him,
Right.
and leave the village alone. So but yeah, when he is fighting, every time he's fought, there is that confidence about him, like, oh, I got this. And whether that's ego or confidence or a combination of both, it is. I didn't realize it until this moment.
Right. No, it's good stuff. I think. It's going to be interesting to see how these dynamics and the characters, how they evolve over time, to kind of see more of themselves as they're progressing on their adventures.
Yeah, and it is like, I feel like this first season book, if you will, because that's what it's called. It is the season where I think we're going to see a lot of this kind of like young childish side of Aang, because I feel like just the way a story works is by the end of this season, something likely terrible and emotional and troublesome is going to happen that involves Aang, to show him the seriousness of this story that needs to be told, and the seriousness of being an avatar to defeat the Fire Nation. So I'll be curious to see, like, and I know we have a lot of episodes to go, but like going forward into book 2 and 3, like how playful is he still? Is he still searching to surf elephant koi fish, or is he like being more serious about his training?
Right, right. Is everything a little less filler and a little more, hey, this is part of our journey because we need to learn ways to do X, Y, and Z to save the world versus, hey, I'm just trying to take this little side project. And to that extent, what part of it is the creators of the show going, all right, we need some filler because Nickelodeon wants 24 episodes.
Right. That
Versus,
is such the shame of television up until about, probably 10 years ago, right? Maybe a little longer, a little shorter, but like it was television standards were like 22 to 24 episodes. So any show, live action, animated, kid drama, whatever, usually ends up with a filler episodes here and there. And what's nice about this show though is Aang is a kid. So like you can easily have something like he specifically went to this island to surf those elephant fish. And you can do that with a kid because like he's already laid it out. He's already said what he wants to do in that the second episode. So
right. It was kind of nice. I didn't realize, in the first watch because I wasn't like keyed into all the details, but it very much was, hey, we're doing that thing we said we were going to do.
Yeah. So I suspect that we'll see some of those other things, at least in this first book here. Because again, I think that right now I think Aang's a little bit more in the know and realizes the seriousness of the situation, that he's the Avatar, the Fire Nation is after him. And while he wasn't purposely avoiding them with his, as Zuko said, evasive maneuvers, he was just not knowing where he was going to try to find the koi fish to surf, or he's just stopping off at all these random places because they were on his checklist, whatever the reason was. He's not a master escape artist or anything. He's just a kid wanting to have fun. And now he knows that like there's probably time to have that, but you can't stay somewhere for what I assume is weeks.
Right. At this point. Right. Yeah. You gotta take a little bit of celebration and move on. Don't overdo it.
Right. Especially, Appa flies so slow. Like it feels like it's a crawl. Like it feels like he's a better swimmer than he is flyer.
Right. I mean, we've seen him charge across the water, so he doesn't really need. And he's got the kite and everything. I think the only thing that's really making it so that he needs to travel is Sokka and Katara not having the means to do that stuff on their own.
Though I would imagine, even if you were on that kite and you're like, let me go from the South Pole to the North Pole, it's gotta be tiring. More tiring than riding your sky bison.
I would assume, yeah.
All right. Well, that's it for this week's Avatar State Radio. I am Kevin Gallagher, and you can find me on social media at That Nerdy Kev, pretty much everywhere except for Facebook. That's at That Nerdy Kev 1984. I'm also the host of the Everything Is Awesome podcast that you can find on awesomepodcast.com. And of course, you can find Avatar State Radio on avatarstateradio.com. Mike?
So I'm Mike. You can find me on tellus.com. Some of our premium channels are patreon.com/tellus and tellus.etsy.com. If you want to see any of our videos, you can check those out on youtube.com/@worldoftellus and twitch.tv/thattellusguy.
And you can find us surfing elephant koi fish on avatarstateradio.com.